harmoniously to the best of our ability. So I'd like to go straight into the actual brief introductions because this could have been a lengthy conversation based on the powerhouses that are here this afternoon as we sit in the Marcus Garvey Amphitheater in this respective space. Dr. Hilary Brown has been active in the field of regional development for the past 20 years and is currently the program manager of Culture and Community Development at the CARICOM Secretariat. Additionally, Dr. Brown has provided technical support to the CARICOM Reparations Commission, which reports to the Prime Ministerial Subcommittee on Reparations since its inception in 2013. Attaché at the Embassy of Jamaica, Washington, D.C., and undertook a host of other types of consultancies. In addition to that, she also is the Queen, we know her as Queen Achom II. I want to make sure I say that, inside of IDO Network International. And she has been really responsible for supporting global African diaspora kingdoms in the reconnection, the various journeys to reconnection in the continent. So let's first and foremost welcome to my immediate right, Dr. Hilary Brown. And moving in the direction to my right, His Excellency Ambassador David Commission, Barbados Ambassador to CARICOM, and I also recall that it's connected to St. Vincent and Grenadines. Yes. Founding chair member of the Caribbean Pan-African Network, founder of the Clement Payne Movement, former head of the Barbadian government's Commission for Pan-African Affairs, and significantly, we should remember this portion, a Pan-Africanist, I'm gonna say that again, a Pan-Africanist that loves the arts, loves creative arts, and I'd like to, and no stranger to the conversation on reparations and has multiple publications. So we'd like to also welcome Ambassador David Commission. And this is where my pronunciation on the international stage will be challenged. Daves Guja, yes, is a prominent Zimbabwean artist with a long and distinguished career. He is regarded as an icon in the creative space with over 35 years of experience in the theater and film industry and various leadership positions. His extensive work encompasses roles as an actor, director, producer, administrator, and social justice activist. His work is at the intersection of Pan-Africanism. Until recently, our brother served as the chair of the African Union Pan-African Cultural Congress Bureau 5, and his current theater piece, Song Unburied, which focuses on restitution and repatriation of heads of our ancestors and artifacts, is on a global tour for the next 3 years. He believes the present and the future is African. So let us welcome Brother Daves Gusja. Moving forward to our right, Dr. June Sumer. Dr. June Sumer has over 30 years of academic and professional experience functioning at the managerial and operational and technical levels in the diplomatic, financial, and educational sectors. She is currently a member of the United Nations Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. And I want to just highlight a few things. Described as a woman of first, she was the first woman to receive a PhD in history from the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus. Whoop, whoop. Here. The first woman to serve as St. Lucian Ambassador to CARICOM and the OECS, first woman to serve as an OECS Commissioner, first woman to serve as the Secretary General of the Association of Caribbean States from 2016 to 2020, and the first woman to perform the role as Chair of the Open Campus Council of the University of the West Indies since 2018. I think that we can welcome the Honorable Ambassador, Dr. Sumer. I did a little research, just a little research. I know you all just said, say my name, right? And then, of course, let me continue. And I want to, oh my, where did I put, And I say this with a lot of wonderful energy coming inside of this space. Dr. Sonja Stanley Nair. And she was very clear that I could have done the longer version of her bio, but she said, just indicate that I'm a professor of cultural studies at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus, and the director for the Center for Reparations Research. Does that say quite a bit? All righty, so let us welcome our honorable sister, Dr. Sonja Stanley Nair. So part of what we're going to do in this conversation is really make it so that if you start to find that you have questions that are just coming out of your throat stream, please jot them down, because the intention is to open up for Q&A, of course, but we want to give each of the panelists an opportunity to highlight what are the key areas around reparations, the movement of reparations, restitution, and of course the healing, this restoration of justice that you prioritize in your work. And I'd like to start, and we can go in this order, and then we can come back.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone here and joining us online. It is such a pleasure, such a privilege and an honor to be here with this esteemed panel. Thank you so much, Dr. Chenzira Davis Kahino, also known to us as Queen Mother Adeki. And let me say thank you to the government of Barbados and to our coordinator, Dr. Mariel Barrow, for all of the excellent work, the hard work, the tremendous undertaking in staging this festival that is so loved, so appreciated, so special to all of us in the region. So first, I wanted to say how important it is and why it is so relevant for us to be discussing reparations, reparatory justice in the context of a regional mega festival on the arts. And I think that because historically, culture really was the site of the most brutal suppression, cultural erasure. If we really think about it, as Africans, people of African descent, for Africans to have survived that brutal system of enslavement, chattel slavery, the transatlantic trafficking of Africans, we had to be a deeply spiritual, deeply cultural, strong people to still be here after that kind of genocidal policy of enslavement that was wrought against Africans. Really, perhaps the most staggering crime against humanity committed historically. So culture was targeted at many levels. Our spirituality could not practice, treated, denigrated as being evil, satanic. We could not use our languages. We couldn't use our names. Our family structures were under constant attack, separation, and of course, many of our cultural expressions. So the banning of the drum, later on the banning of carnival in Trinidad and Tobago, and even coming to the present, the ways in which the expressions of the people are always under attack of Africans. And so it means then that the process of reparatory justice really has to encompass that renewal in terms of culture. That is where the resistance has always been germane. And so in the context of CARIFEST, it's really very important for us to speak about reparatory justice because it is our culture that enabled us to survive, our culture and our spirituality. And this is really where a lot of the resistance that we see into the present, it is really embodied, embedded in our cultural expressions and just our way of thinking and being. So I wanted to highlight as well, excuse me, that as the CARICOM Reparations Commission has elaborated a 10-point plan for reparatory justice, which covers a range of areas, as you would know, beginning with an apology and looking at restitution in terms of health and education and culture and debt cancellation and being compensated and technology transfer and all of the various areas. But I think as a commission, beginning the journey in thinking about the various ways in which we must seek reparations to address justice and healing. I think what has come out in the process is the importance of that psychological healing and cultural wholeness. And so we no longer speak about going to Africa for cultural exchange and tourism. We talk about cultural reconnection. It is about reconnecting with the continent, reconnecting with traditional kingdoms and systems, those from which we were brutally separated 400 or 500 years ago. And so as much as we are excited about going to visit Africa, really it is about becoming once again embedded in our African history, culture, communities, because all of that we lost in the transatlantic slave trade. We lost community, language, aspects of our culture. We lost our people. We lost our spirituality as we practiced it in Africa, with the exception of some of the key elements, bodies that continue to practice important spirituality within the region. We also lost our names, and we lost an important tradition of royalty. And so all of that is part of the cultural healing and wholeness that we seek. And I think the CARICOM reparations movement has come to appreciate that this is a critical part of what we need to do to enable our people in the diaspora to achieve that healing that we speak about and the wholeness. And so this has become an important part of the work that the Commission is doing and arranging reconnection journeys to Africa, to Kenya, to Uganda, to South Africa, to Nigeria, and reconnecting with the royal fathers and the traditional kings and queens of Africa. So I really want to highlight the importance of that in this important context and of CARIFEST and also of being in this Marcus Garvey Amphitheater, where we are always inspired by one of the greatest Pan-Africanists who fought for African liberation and reconnection. So I'll pause there and turn back over to pass on to Ambassador David Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Brothers and sisters, this is the place in Barbados that Marcus Garvey visited on the 18th of October, 1937. He spoke to the Barbadian people here in the area that we know as the Steel Shed. It's a short distance from here. And so I have to begin my discourse with a quotation, and it is this. And I know you too, believe in time, and we shall wait patiently for 200 years, if need be, to face our enemies through our posterity. When I am dead, wrap the mantle of the red, black, and green around me. For in the new life, I shall rise with God's grace and blessing. Look for me in the whirlwind or the storm. Look for me all around you. I shall come and bring with me countless millions of black slaves who have died in America and the West Indies, and the millions in Africa, to aid you in the fight for liberty, freedom, and life. I shall write the history that will inspire the millions that are coming and leave the posterity of our enemies to reckon with the host for the deeds of their fathers. End of quote. The Honorable Marcus Garvey, 10th February 1925, Atlanta, Georgia. And this quotation from Garvey is very appropriate to the reparations message, because he is saying it doesn't matter how long it takes, there's no impunity for crimes against humanity. If it has to take 200 years, the day of reckoning is coming. And that's basically the fundamental message of the reparations movement. There's no impunity. You commit a crime against humanity, the time will come. You may not have been called upon to pay, to be held accountable back in 1833, 1834. You may not have been held accountable when we became independent in the 1960s, but the time has come where you must be held accountable. If we, the descendants of those African ancestors, if we fail to demand accountability and justice, we would be sending for those terrible crimes that were committed against our ancestors. If we fail to demand accountability and justice, if we fail to demand reparations, we would be sending a message to the world at large, but to ourselves as well, that we do not consider that our ancestors were sacred beings made in the likeness and image of the Almighty Creator and deserving of justice. And so that is the fundamental principle of the reparations mission. It is an affirmation by ourselves of our own humanity and the sacred humanity of our forebears. Now, most of us here are, in a sense, representatives of the CARICOM reparations campaign. That is a campaign that goes back to the year 2013. At the CARICOM Heads of Government Conference in July of 2013 in Trinidad and Tobago, our heads of government came together and made an historic decision that the CARICOM family of nations, we were going to be pursuing a reparations claim against the relevant Western European nations for the genocide inflicted on the indigenous people of the Caribbean and the enslavement inflicted on our African ancestors. And the heads of government haven't made that decision in July. By October, we had set up a major conference in St. Vincent, Kingstown, St. Vincent, where we all came together and put our reparations campaign in place. We all came together, we established our CARICOM Reparations Commission, we established our working procedures, and that was the fundamental building block of the CARICOM reparations campaign that the whole world has since come to know. I was at that meeting in Kingston, and I've written about it in an essay entitled A Reparations Manifesto. I just want to quote a little bit from that essay. One of the memorable things we said at that historic Kingston gathering was that the 21st century was destined to be the century of reparative justice. Indeed, we declared that we were embarking on a campaign in which we would be striving for a worldwide transformation of centuries-old relationships between the black, brown, and white peoples of the world. Relationships that tragically were and are still based on old but persisting patterns of discrimination, exploitation, inequity, and domination. Relationships that are rooted in centuries of imperialism, colonialism, systemic racial discrimination, African enslavement, and native genocide. We were determined that our campaign would promote the sort of global justice that the world so desperately needs. Reparatory justice in all of its dimensions: social justice, economic justice, climate justice, and that we would be striving for the new relationships that would shift the current destructive international economic model towards social, economic, and environmental sustainability. So, as you can see, reparations for us in the Caribbean community is not merely about a money payment. Yes, there is a money component, but reparations is about much more than money. Rather, it is a revolutionary program of transformation that is designed to eradicate structures, practices, and consequences of anti-black and anti-indigenous racism, and to create just societies and a just international order. Put another way, our CARICOM reparatory justice campaign is designed to address the historical legacies of underdevelopment that are directly linked to the European perpetrated crimes of native genocide and African enslavement. So I wanted to quote that in detail so that we can begin with an understanding of how comprehensive and overarching and revolutionary the reparations campaign is. Some people, some of our opponents, our adversaries, seek to trivialize it and to reduce it to some kind of little money grab. No, no, no. It is much more than any money grab. It is a revolutionary program of transformation. And I would just like to end by breaking down, simplifying what I've just said, by breaking it down into 5 components. So, reparations is the remedy that is due and that is appropriate where a wrong or a crime has been committed in international law. In particular, the most heinous forms of international law crime, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Reparations is the remedy. And reparations is a remedy that is supposed to repair the damage that was done. That is supposed, once it is fully implemented, to restore the situation, the damaged situation, to what, in all likelihood, the situation would have been if the crime had never been committed in the first place. So having said that, for me, 5 components of reparations. Number 1, before that transatlantic slave trade, or trade, that transatlantic trade in enslaved Africans, our people, our ancestors, possessed and lived in their own nations on the continent of Africa. They had their own nations. They had sovereignty. They had self-determination. The first component, therefore, is a demand for decolonization. You cannot bring African people over the Middle Passage. You enslave them. You exploit them. You oppress them. You plunder them for hundreds of years. They resist. And then at the end of that process, you tell them that they're to remain as subjects in some little European colony. No. If you're to repair that damage, if they are to be taken back to the position they would have been in if the crime had never been committed, they would have had their own nations. They would have had their own national sovereignty and self-determination. So reparations underpins the drive for decolonization, which we will speak about at 4 o'clock. Secondly, Dr. Hilary Brown mentioned the CARICOM 10-point plan. That's the second component. We have dealing with those structures of underdevelopment that are directly linked to the crime. I won't go into that. That's number 2. Number 3, you heard it implicit in what I read out, what I quoted. We, more and more, we are recognizing that the international economic and political order that exists today has its roots in those centuries of enslavement and colonization. And that order, we, the black and brown peoples and nations of the world, that order was intrinsically unjust and exploitative, and it is still structurally unjust and exploitative. And we have still been inserted in that international economic and political order in a structurally unjust and exploitative manner. And so reparations, it is about a fundamental revamping of that international economic and political order to give us the justice and the rights that are ours by right. Then fourthly, reparations, yes, it is an outward demand for these reforms, but it's also an inward reflection in which we look inward to our own psyches, our own cultures, our own personality. We look inward for self-healing. Dr. Brown spoke about that as well. We look within ourselves. Are there any vestiges of notions of white superiority and black inferiority still within us that we need to identify and extirpate? So it is about psychological and cultural healing as well. And finally, number 5, a fundamental component of our reparations campaign must be to deconstruct that very dangerous and very bogus myth of the supremacy of white civilization, of the West, of the so-called West. The myth of the superiority of the West, of the so-called European civilization. This myth that they have created, where they have put themselves at the pinnacle as the elite universal measure for all other people. When we examine that myth of Western superiority, we see that it is based upon, it is riddled through, it is based upon criminality. That vaunted European structure was based on the commission of the most terrible crimes against humanity, genocides against native people from the Americas to Australia, enslavement, rape and plunder. So we must challenge it. We must deconstruct that myth of Western superiority, first within ourselves, within our own psyches, but we must also confront that white Western world with the bogusness, the fraudulence of their myth. This is very important because we will not create that new order, that new human, social, cultural order if the bogus, the fraudulent myth of white Western superiority is allowed to continue to exist. Thank you very much.
One of the key dangers is being a speaker that follows such eloquence. And they're like, okay, what shall I talk about? You know? But having said so, first and foremost, I would like to thank Dr. Hilary Brown for being a Nyamukuta, for being a mediator, for me being here, me and my team. So I am from Zimbabwe, and we are traveling with a particular play called Song and Buried, of which you are all invited tonight. Should you not show up, rest assured I'm going to have a conversation with my ancestors, and we'll deal with you accordingly. So, yeah. Yes. Right. I always say, you know, you have just given me a huge lesson into history. You know, because we don't have the 400 years of this history you're talking about on that continent. We don't have it at all. It's been totally erased. I would like to start with a particular statement, and it's in my native language. It's in my language, basically, and I speak Shona. And this statement is, Mapupa angu achamuka. It means, these bones shall rise. This was the famous statement that our spiritual medium, Nehanda, who has actually become of a global figure, and she's the one that actually kind of represents Zimbabwe in its full context. These are the words she said when she was being hung in 1896 on some tree, when she refused to convert to Christianity, and when she decided to utter those words as a clarion call for future generations to take up arms and fight for the country, and that was in 1896. Now, fast forward to about 1961. We entered into a new phase of trying to get Zimbabwe's independence. I was too young. Yes, I look like an ancestor, but believe you me, I'm pretty much young, right? But around 1961, the spirit world Because, you know, Zimbabwe is a very spiritual country. So around 1961, the spirit world then gave a nudge to the guerrillas, to the liberation movement, to say, you must restart that war. And war in Zimbabwe, maybe you've come across this word called chimurenga. You know. So chimurenga is war. And if you remove the chi part of it, you only remain with murenga. So when Zimbabwe wants to go to war, we invoke, our god of war is murenga. So the chi part of it is really, is the subtext that sort of says, now we must. You know, it's a movement. So around 1961, there's a little bit of history. You understand there's a method to my madness here. Around 1961, people like Robert Mugabe, people like Joshua Nkomo, and all the other leaders that you know of were brought into a shrine, one of our most sacred shrines, and they had a conversation with the spirit mediums. And this is real, it's well documented. So with that meeting, they were asked to do two things. They requested the spirit mediums for assistance to win the war of liberation. And the response from the spirit world was, we will assist you on condition that when you come back, you need to do two things. One, you must cleanse the land. When you win the war, cleanse the land of all the bloodshed that would have been spilled. Mind you, Zimbabwe lost over 25,000 people for us to get our independence. It was a long, drawn-out war. And then the second request was, you must bring back our heads that are in the British Museum, that are at Oxford, and that are actually in Edinburgh. This was the demand. Now, when the play that I do is really about trying to find resonance, it's trying to put closure to an agreement that was made in 1961, a pact that our political leaders made with the spiritual world, and they've never fulfilled it. Those that are familiar with some of Zimbabwe's problems, for us, we always say as Zimbabweans, the reason why the country sometimes finds itself in a dangerous space is because the spirit world still believes that the country is still at war. Because the politicians have deliberately decided not to put closure to this particular part. In 1980, fast forward to 1980, Zimbabwe gets independence and Robert Mugabe comes into power. He initiates about 7, we call them biras, 7 gatherings in various provinces, so that at least we could actually start the process of cleansing the land. And when it came to bira number 8, he said he had had enough. The day he said so is the day when Zimbabwe actually lost in an unexplainable stampede in our National Sports Stadium. We lost 97 people. They just died, just like that. So, where am I going with this? That statement of Mapupangu Achamuka, which has never found closure, and a leadership that has remained obdurate, that has put us really at major crossroads as a new generation. And I classify myself as part of the new generation. I'm 58, by the way, so I'm part of the new generation. Because at independence I was 13, so now I'm that. 5 years ago, the British government, and this is a real story, you can actually Google it up and so forth, because it's actually something that's happening as we speak. The British government 5 years ago approached the Zimbabwean government and they said, can you please come and collect your heads? These heads that we're talking about are heads of our spiritual leaders. In Nehanda was just one of them. In total, there are 13 spiritual heads. Our understanding is that these heads were preserved in jars. So we are at that time where we actually said to ourselves, how can we go to the UK to collect those heads? For the last 4 years, this conversation, which has been ongoing, sometimes it kind of moves fast, sometimes it stops, it moves and then it stops. But as of 3 months ago, the British government said to our National Museum and Monuments, said, can you please come in with your team and collect them? Right. Now, there's a point of departure here. What does one do with 13 heads of ancestors when they come back? Do you put them in a museum? Do you preserve them in some mausoleum? What do you do? And this is why I created the work that you come tonight to see. The Minister of Home Affairs is of the opinion that when these heads come back, let's build a structure for them and put them there. Now, for some of us who are really spiritual and who communicate, we spend a lot of our time actually in our villages and talk to the ancestors and everybody else. We are very clear that the bodies, those 13 bodies that were buried in 1896 without those heads, were never buried. Because culturally, when you have not buried the head, you have not buried the person. So we have been pushing a deliberate agenda to say, when these heads come back, hand them over to the families. The families are still there. The descendants are still there. But for some strange reason, yes, we're stuck in that kind of matrix. Which leads us to why we created that particular work, to do two things. One, because we believe that the Zimbabwean story can be a story from Ghana, can be a story from Zambia, can be a story from everybody else, from everywhere else, because Zimbabwe is not the only country that has got heads that were taken as trophies by the colonizers. There's quite a number of those countries that actually went through that, particularly from the 1800s and onwards. So whilst the transatlantic slave was happening this way, we were actually going through this decapitation. And I always think that it's just unfortunate that our leaders are not talking to each other, so that at least we can marry the stories from here and the stories that have remained within the continent, the happenings themselves, and see how do we move forward and try to put closure to these hanging issues once and for all, if it's even possible to put closure once and for all. We have caused such a scene in Zimbabwe to such an extent that we were supposed to be performing in Edinburgh last month. Normally it takes 2 weeks to get a British visa. We only got our visas after 32 days. And we are very clear in our minds that the British ambassador to Zimbabwe, when he realized that, okay, this play is now coming in their backyard, they realized they were not prepared for it. So the trick then became, yeah, let's delay the issuance of visas as much as we can. And we ended up not doing that particular play in Edinburgh. However, next year we are very clear. We are applying almost about 4 months ahead of time, and we need to do that play in that backyard. I would like to finish just by saying that restitution for us as a theater maker, because I think I'm more into practice. I'm the guy who goes in and sort of says, you know what, let's have the ancestors here, let's have the spirit mediums here, you know. Let's bring them, let's have this conversation with them, you know. Let's see what they're actually saying. Let's hear what they're saying, because they do talk. They do talk, and they actually raise these issues continuously and say, how can we then package their voices? How can we package their intentions and use this as an advocacy tool. So I'm so hoping that you'll be joining us in our advocacy journey so that at least we can open up the discussion and use practical examples, practical experiences using the creative economy to tell our story on a much broader level. I thank you.
Thank you very much. You have received so far a very comprehensive overview with regard to the issue of reparatory justice. But I want to add 2 dimensions to that. The first is something that I work on a lot, and that is reparations for women of African descent. And the reason why I focus on women of African descent is because I know that enslavement and the concept of chattel slavery was not a gender-neutral term. That there was specific war waged against women of African descent, and that war has legacies that we see today in daily life. My first reason for doing this happened when I was at university here in Barbados at Caville, when my professor, who is now the esteemed Sir Hilary Beckles, said in a class, the only person who could reproduce an enslaved person was an African woman. Think about that for a second. So I thought to myself, and it was the first time I ever cried in a class, and I haven't cried since, because I was then determined to fight. I thought to myself that if I had been an enslaved woman, all of my generations would have been enslaved because of me as a woman. And a lot of the images that you see of African women, and after that, women of African descent in the literature, would focus on the negative. So here I am as a female history student, reading that African women were considered masculine. You remember in the first conversation that we had at Golden Square that Sir Hilary said that Barbados is one of the slave societies where women outnumbered men. And that is because, one of the reasons is because of the fact that they saw us as being equal to men working on the field, in the cane fields. There was no difference between the African man and the African woman. They took away everything that was feminine and womanly about us. And we were these masculine beings able to go into the fields and work, to reproduce 1 second and back in the cane fields the next second, because we did not feel pain during childbirth. And a lot of the experiments that have been done in terms of gynecology with regard to the female body was done on enslaved women. And these experiments were written into medical books that exist today that say we cannot bear pain, that we can bear pain, that we cannot, we are strong enough, our bodies are strong enough to be able to labor and to labor. And so for me, it is important that we recognize that there must be reparations for the woman of African descent also. And this has translated into a number of challenges that we face. So because we were these big, robust women, we were not feminine, and because we are being placed against white women, that we were not beautiful, and what the questions that David spoke to with regard to white superiority, we have to consider in terms of gender also. Because we were not considered beautiful, I remember when I was about 9 years old, my mother taking a niece and I to a fair, and she met this woman who said to her, when she looked at my niece, "What a beautiful black child." And my mother, very gentle woman, but very outspoken, very much like me, said to her, "Why did you say a beautiful black child? Why didn't you just say a beautiful child? Aren't black people beautiful also?" And that was my first awareness that all of these shades and mosaics and diversity of us as people is important. We must speak to it. Because dark-skinned women get a very raw deal. And we have to make sure that we fight for them as women. Because then you come down to the little nitty-gritty. Everything about us is physical. So it is about our bodies, and they don't mind, and even we don't mind when those things that they do not consider beautiful in us, whether it's the hips or the bum or the breasts or the lips, are now plasticized. We don't mind that, but we don't want it on black women. It's ugly on black women because of the color of their skin. And then our hair is never good enough. When I was becoming ambassador to CARICOM and OACS, a woman stopped me and said, "I heard you were being selected as the ambassador. I hope that you are going to do something about your hair." And so the legacies, the healing that we have to go through as a people with regard to the way we think of ourselves is important. And why I focus on women, it is not because I don't want to focus on men. I think the story is incomplete if we do not focus on reparations for women. We have a specific place in history that we must speak to. So that is my first point. And you asked for a deliverable, Dr. Chen. One of the things I want us to do in the decolonization process is to remove the laws that continue to discriminate against women of African descent. So it is still legal in some of our countries for husbands to rape wives, because we have not taken the time to go into the legislation to see how it discriminates against women. And we will never have a healed society if we do not ensure that there is healing for our women. So that is my first important point and deliverable. And the other one has to do with what was said with regard to the fact that there is not that 400-year history being taught or known of in Africa. And one of the things that the reparations, the CARICOM reparations movement has done is to awaken something that we are starting to see bear fruit, and that is global Africa. The reparations movement must become a global movement. It cannot simply be about us in the Caribbean asking for repair and restitution and healing. It must be the whole, the globe of global Africa that is asking for that. And so the trip of that play going around the world is one of the things that we have to promote. And the reparations movement must span everywhere in the world. We have made a lot of strides because of what CARICOM brings to the table. Never underestimate our reparations movement. We have taken it to the United States. We have spoken in parliaments in Europe. We have taken it to Latin America and Central America. And we are now having the conversations with Africa. On the 7th of September, the 6th and 7th of September, our heads of government will be speaking at the AU, at the African Union CARICOM Summit in Addis. And we will be talking to not only the theme of the African Union for this year, which they have now expanded into a decade, which is reparations for Africa and people of African descent, as well as our own 10-point plan, which we have revised and we're in the process of rolling out, to show that we have been at the forefront because we understand that the inhumanity and the laws that were put in place in the Caribbean, in Barbados, starting in Barbados, which said that we were not human, is now a global issue, that no African or person of African descent is considered human. And when they look at us, that is the first thing that they see, that we are not human. And every day we have to be fighting for that humanity, even more so when you're a black woman. I can tell you that because of the spaces where I sit, that you have to always fight for your humanity as an African or a person of African descent. And I'm saying that it is time for our heads to make that move. That's the other deliverable I want, Dr. Chen. And that is for us to confront Europe. We have to go in, if they will not come to us and they will not respond to our letters, that we ourselves must now go to Europe and make it very clear that this reparations movement is not simply about compensation. Yes, they owe us compensation. They were paying the British planters' families compensation until 2015. It's not something that is so far away, because some of our people tell us, forget it. It was a long time ago. It cannot be a long time ago when the trauma is still in you. It cannot be. Somebody said in the previous panel, genetics is about language. It's more than about language. It is about you as a people and the trauma that you have faced. And you react in certain ways, and you don't understand why you react that way. So I want us to be sure that we take this movement global, but we also have to take it through the region. Our people still don't know enough about reparations. And so that is another thing that we must do, Dr. Chen. And I thank you very much for this opportunity.
In the spirit of my ancestors, in the spirit of your ancestors, in the spirit of Marcus Garvey, who stood in this place, as a Jamaican, I want to say to you, there's a railroad made of human bones at the bottom of the Atlantic, in the words of Amiri Baraka. And in my focus on internal repair, it is important to acknowledge that this repair, you have heard it from each of our panelists, that this repair is repair that has to happen at several levels, in several geographical locations, but absolutely in the context of the African diaspora. Our only job right now is reparatory justice. I am here today to remind us that our only job right now is reparation. We have no other job as peoples of African descent. You have heard said in different ways from each of our panelists that there is work to be done. Reparatory justice is a mission. And if we are on that mission, it means everyone has the job to make sure that the process of emancipation, in the words of Erna Brodba, needs to be completed. We are still yet to complete that emancipation process. Many of us are living in mental slavery. This is why it's important that we're in this place and honoring Marcus Garvey in the way that we are through our words today. There is an umbilical cord that connects Marcus Garvey to the Caribbean reparation movement today. There is no way to forget about a Marcus Garvey. And in fact, we are in Marcus Garvey's month. I just last week, I think it was last week, a few days ago, gave the Marcus Garvey lecture in Kingston, Jamaica. And one of the important things is to remind ourselves that internal repair is critical. There are people still in 2025 who believe that we would have been better under the British, better under the Portuguese, better under the Dutch, right? Better under the Spanish. We have to go through that process of decolonization in a systematic way. And that is where the work that I do at the Center for Reparation Research at the University of the West Indies, which supports the CARICOM reparation movement, is critical. One of the things we have decided is that we must take reparation to the streets. That means no Caribbean citizen, no matter how old, must be alienated from this movement. The child in the basic school must be able to understand reparation at the level that they can. We are the ones holding our children back. There is no reason why our Jamaican children, for example, are not speaking 4 languages, or Barbadian children are not speaking 4 languages by the time they're 5. This is common in Africa. So it's not a matter of capacity. It is a matter of how it is we decolonize our own selves to understand that children are sponges. They're going to be able to learn and understand at the level that they understand, whatever it is we're trying to teach them. So taking reparation to the streets means that we have to systematically reach every citizen. And last count, was it 44 million in CARICOM? Correct. We must reach every...
Maybe 44 in the Caribbean.
Caribbean. Yes, in the Caribbean. In the Caribbean. 44 million. We must reach our 44 million people. And there is, of course, a diaspora, a Caribbean diaspora that must also be reached. And I am very passionate about this because we could, in our movement, focus on the diplomatic work that needs to be done to engage with the former colonizers and leave behind our own citizens who are living with the legacies of enslavement, the legacies of chattel enslavement, the legacies of colonialism, and we ourselves doing damage to ourselves internally, continuously, repeatedly. Julius Garvey, in a conversation he was having many years ago, 2012, 2015, thereabout, he reminded us of that internal repair we needed to do because of this internal damage we continue to do to ourselves. So this reparation movement is not about the people you're seeing on this platform. It's not about the people who are doing research in universities only. It's about every citizen in the Caribbean. And so the Center for Reparation Research, we decided that we were also going to focus on youth. We launched an international reparation debating competition. I don't know how many of you have heard about it, but we will be staging that international reparation debating competition again in 2026. A Trinidadian school won the 2025 International Reparation Debating Competition. And we were so very proud of those young people who took to this knowledge with the passion that I wanted to see. I imagined the conversations that would be happening in the homes, how those students preparing for the debating competition would be speaking to their community members, their teachers, their classmates. That's what I wanted. A routinization of reparation, of reparatory justice. That's where we are. That's where we must be. So I say to you that there is work to be done. This is a mission, and that every single citizen of the Caribbean has to be recruited into this mission. Thank you very much.
I want to thank you each for just giving some context to why we were gathered in this particular space at this particular time and season. You highlighted that, Dr. Sonja, by just sharing the fact people refer to it as Mosiah Month, Garvey Month, African Liberation Month, Part 2, because we do share May. But we also want to to share a couple of things, because what I'm hearing, and thank you for all of the actionable deliverables, because while we're speaking about reparations and reparatory justice and the link it has to decolonization, this also has, and the link to dehumanization of African, indigenous, ancestral, native people. It's very important that we don't leave out anyone in that conversation. This is happening across the board with humanity. And the things that have been highlighted on the specificity around the issues affecting our African women in particular, as so eloquently shared by Dr. Sumer. And the historiography for persons that may want to get more information. That's the other part that I left out, that Ambassador Commission, by training, is a lawyer. So he can identify the legal ramifications, the history, the logistics, chronologically, even if it took more than the allocated 10 minutes, which is fine. I'm clear, because that needed to be said. But the other portion of what we're sharing here today, you can't keep Garvey to any time. That's right. That takes us back to the conversation in regard to Fidel and others. Yes. And I think it's important that we speak of around this theme of the enduring impacts of reparations, the way that we ground this inside of what is being done through CARICOM, through the CCR, through CPAN, and several other organizations, through the still existence Universal Negro Improvement Association, African Communities League, whichever version that persons speak of, because persons forget sometimes that the UNIA still exists in many spaces internationally. And with all of the technology that we have and all of the AI that we have access to, sometimes we overlook they had millions in the early 20th century. And so it's to restore that, and doing that through the reparations movement, taking it to the streets, having the youth involved, elders that are involved, persons that are academics or not, persons that are artisans, persons that are in every sphere of our existence. That is primary, right? So that was pretty much, so what I just wanted to make sure that I didn't forget the piece. And hearing about Chimurenga and Moringa and Nehanda, for those that aren't familiar, that's the type of research that's important when we speak of reparations. Because this is the justice part is significant, and the repair of our relations are significant. You can't heal if you don't know you hurt. It's very difficult to heal if you don't know your body slash up. So we have to acknowledge that, recognize that, hold that space, and then facilitate through the work of ancestral engagement. I want to make sure persons don't get spooked by this. When we're speaking of ancestors, we're just speaking of our family from before, and showing reverence and veneration and not getting tossed about on Eurocentric ideologies that try to strip us of what used to keep us strong and will facilitate our reparatory justice healing on many levels. So the next section, and I need this part to be a little more concise, only because we'd like to open up and at least, does anyone have questions yet? Okay, see, I knew it was coming, so I'm making sure I ask first, right? We want to make sure. We could. Is there a microphone out there? Thank you very much. And please just introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Edmund Hinkson, former Home Affairs Minister in Barbados, former parliamentarian, direct contemporary of David's, in fact, attorney at law as well. And is, first want to congratulate the organizers of this session. Yes, in the name of Marcus Garvey, perhaps the most important figure coming out of the the English-speaking Caribbean ever. Two issues I want to raise. One, I was extremely interested, especially in Dr. Sonia's presentation and in others who spoke about the need for us still to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery, as Bob said. And one of the issues that troubles me, yes, and I agree we have to bring down the issue of reparations, which any right-thinking black person would agree with in principle. Certainly, reparatory justice is required. But bring that down to the level of the grassroots in a situation where we still have some countries in CARICOM independent for over 60 years, and some of which members of the panel are born in, which still go to the British Privy Council as their final court of appeal, and which still have the King of England, with the greatest respect to the monarchy of England, as their head of state, and where the political leadership of these countries and can't come together to understand that we cannot have full independence and emancipation if our political system at head of state level is outside of their country and our region, as well as the legal system. And how do we now move to change that in a situation where perhaps, as was said, the average person in the street in Jamaica, in St. Lucia, feels that this has nothing to do with them, that it doesn't put bread on their table tomorrow morning, but which is of fundamental, in my opinion, psychological importance to our advancement as a people. And if we can't get our own political leadership in some countries to move towards and understand that we as independent countries since the 1960s have to vest our strict internal affairs within the context of our countries and CARICOM, we still have a lot of work to do, as has been said. The second issue is the concept of reparatory justice is, of course, known globally. The Jews have got and continue to get every year reparatory justice for the Holocaust, which, in my submission, and I think the moderator said, is not as equal an international crime against humanity as slavery was. Slavery, of course, going over hundreds of years, as opposed to 6 years of a Holocaust. And even every year, as I understand it, reparations are paid to the World Jewish Congress by Germany, continue to be paid. In America, there are examples where the US government paid the Japanese, whose, even though they were US citizens, were interned, etc., during the World War, or both World Wars. So there's the concept, accepted concept internationally and globally for reparatory justice. And why, I would wish to hear from the panel, has it not been accepted internationally or globally that Caribbean people, that African people, people of African descent should get reparatory justice too for centuries of inhumanity committed against us? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I want us to field another question and then go to conversation. Is there another question? Yes, please take the microphone to our sister.
Hello, thank you for the knowledge and wisdom you have shared with us. My name is Vernita Pearl Ford. I'm with the Center for United Nations Constitutional Research. And yes, we have to take this to the streets. We have to take it to the community. We have to take it to our capitals. We have to take it to the regional organizations. We have to take it to the regional courts. And we also have to take it to the United Nations and the International Court of Justice, reparations. And I have made the case that I do believe that this region, just given all that it has done, is so well placed to play the global leadership role in invoking Article 109 of the United Nations Charter, which allows for the convening of another international convening. 80 years ago today, 80 years ago this year, the United Nations was born. A third of the world was colonized. Most of the people who looked like us were not there. 50 nations created that charter. And now I think for the first time, a lot of people in the world understand the power of the United Nations, the weaknesses, and there is an instrument we can use to actually drive reparations, create that new international economic order that we need, and so much more in a participatory and democratic process. And I would just love your comments. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The sister here. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the wonderful information shared. My name is Nilda Arduin. I'm from the 37 square miles of St. Martin. Small, but put it in your eyes and you'll come again. A question really to our brother from Zimbabwe. I'm a lawyer. I've been the first ombudsman on St. Martin, being part of the International Organization of Ombudsman. What something that our colleague from Zimbabwe said, that the history of slavery is not commonly taught on the continent. And that brought me to the thought, as an academic, I often ask peers, colleagues of mine, especially when I was on the African continent, whether they wondered whether I'm a distant cousin or not. And somehow I felt that with a sense of shame, they would tell me, you know something, the history of the transatlantic slave trade, we hardly know anything about it. And I'm talking about academics. And it was never taught to us. And having brought forward by our colleague from Zimbabwe, and the fact that we are saying that we have to reconnect the West Indian stories and the stories from the continent, I would like the gentleman, our brother from Zimbabwe, to say a little more why the history of the transatlantic slave trade is not commonly taught in the schools on the continent. I'm always saying it all depends who tells the story.
Thank you very much for that. Is there any burning? No. Okay, we're going to have to roll this in. So afterwards, just please know that we're working on time. I didn't look at the time, but we're still on time. This is a good thing. And before I release this mic, though, I just want to highlight something that we keep saying. English is really a peculiar language because we tend to beautify things and sanitize things when we even mention the transatlantic slave trade. It sounds like shopping, yeah? But trafficking is more accurate. Terrorism is more accurate. And genocide combined. So I just wanted to put that in our mindset so that while we're using the terms that are more common, we need to call this experience exactly what it was. It was ancestral treason to a point that is unimaginable. And with that, I will release the mic.
Thank you, and thank you for those really great questions and comments. I wanted to comment on the first point that was raised about why it is that people of African descent, why there doesn't seem to be that global consensus, willingness, understanding, why it is people of African descent should get reparations. And I want to say that it is essentially located in the racist ideology, the white supremacy, all of the legacies of enslavement, in fact, dictate an international sensibility that black people are not deserving. They were not deserving of being compensated at the end of enslavement. They were turned off the plantations, given nothing to work with. They had to work together and establish free villages and so on. So beginning from the very beginning, we were not perceived to be deserving. The ideology of racism is such that people of African descent are at the bottom of the social ladder, and they are where they deserve to be because they were subhuman, they were 3/4 of a person, and still largely seen in that context and in that ideology. So going to the next point of how do we then mobilize, and I know Dr. Suma will have a lot more to say on that, but it comes back to that concept of global Africa. We have to be united in this fight and in this struggle. The more we come together on this, Africa, her diaspora, as well as those persons who are not African who support the cause. It needs a coalition of all the like-minded, all of those who are convinced and seized and appreciate the suffering and the continued suffering that people of African descent continue to endure.
I want to touch on the question that Eddie raised about why, and just to build upon what Dr. Hilary Brown said about why this entrenched denial of the right of African people to reparations. So I was very much involved in the United Nations World Conference Against Racism, in all the preparatory meetings in Geneva. And during that process, the European representatives, and in particular, the British representatives, said to us that we don't owe you reparations because at the time when slavery was practiced against your ancestors, it was legal. Now, because we are here in Barbados, and because that bogus notion that the enslavement of African people was legal actually was constructed right here in Barbados, I would like to just share with you a little information taken from this booklet that I published this year. It's entitled, What to the Republic of Barbados Does the 14th of May 1625 Mean? Barbados was colonized by the British in 1625. So this year is the 400th anniversary of that colonizing mission. So Barbados was the sugar revolution, sugar plantation economy, large sugar required large numbers of imported African enslaved labor. By 1660, the percentage of the population of Barbados that consisted of enslaved Africans was outstripping the European percentage. And so the then colonial House of Assembly said the time has come when we have to put some serious legislation in place to regularize the system of enslavement. And so they passed the infamous 1661 Barbados Slavery Code, which became the model. In that slavery code, they said in the preamble of that slavery code, we in Barbados, as a colonial House of Assembly, we are not entitled to enact any laws that are contradictory. We are entitled to enact laws, but we are not entitled to enact any laws that are contradictory to the laws of the mother country, England. They also said, when we look at the whole scope of English law, there is nothing in the English law to guide us how to deal with slaves. And that was so because slavery had been abolished in England since the 12th century. So they had embarked upon this slavery regime at a time when slavery was actually illegal in the so-called mother country. Anyhow, I just want to, but how did they go about doing it? And I will read for you the preamble of the 1688. So they started with 1661, and they periodically revised these statutes to perfect the legislation. So by 1688, they passed the Act for the Governing of Negroes. And this is what it says. Listen carefully. Whereas the plantations and estates of this island cannot be fully managed and brought into use without the labor and service of great numbers of Negroes and other slaves. And for as much as the said Negroes and other slaves brought unto the people of this island for that purpose are of barbarous, wild, and savage natures, and such renders them wholly unqualified to be governed by the laws, customs, and practices of our nations, it therefore becomes absolutely necessary that such other constitutions, laws, and orders should be in this island framed and enacted for the good regulating and ordering of them, as may restrain the disorders, rapes, and inhumanities to which they are naturally prone and inclined. End of quote. So understand what is happening here. In England, it is against the law to kidnap, to enslave, to imprison, to mutilate, to rape a human being. It is against the law. This Barbados House of Assembly, in order to get around that situation, said, we, the Barbados House of Assembly, we determine that these Africans are not human beings. These are wild, barbarous, and savage creatures who are inclined to disorders, rapes, who are naturally prone and inclined to disorders, rapes, and inhumanities. And therefore, the legal system that applies in England is not appropriate to be applied to them. And therefore, we are at liberty to create an entirely new legal regime to apply to these savage, non-human creatures. Well, what we know is that no legislative assembly has the power to transform a human being into anything other than a human being. It is a factual absurdity, and we know that legislative acts that are factually absurd are inherently null and void. So this act, this bogus act of the Barbados House of Assembly, which was based on this fraudulent and bogus rationalization about Africans, this was passed up. It was enacted in the Colonial Assembly, passed up to the British monarch for his consent, and became legislation. And so it was these Barbadian acts of Parliament, these bogus, philosophically fraudulent and jurisprudentially fraudulent pieces of legislation that then were exported from Barbados to Jamaica, to South Carolina, all across the 13 colonies of what became the United States of America. This is when the British diplomat gets up at the UN in Geneva and says, we don't owe reparations because when slavery was practiced, it was legal. It is this bogus, fraudulent actions of the Barbados House of Assembly on which he and she are pinning their argument. So we know that slavery was illegal under the national laws of England and similarly the other Western European nation states. And we also know that that system of racialized chattel slavery that denied the humanity of the people that it imposed itself upon was also illegal under the then existing international law. We know that international law in the 17th and 18th century, it would have permitted what is known as serfdom. There was serfdom in Europe, there was serfdom in Africa, there was serfdom all across the world, and international law would perhaps have accommodated serfdom. But the racialized chattel slavery that these European powers constructed, that was not serfdom. That was a much more profound level of criminality and barbarity, and it would have been illegal under international law as well. So to answer your question, Eddie, really and truly, they have no leg to stand upon. Slavery, the enslavement that was imposed on our ancestors was always illegal, whether under their national laws or under international law. And international law tells us where there's a crime, there must be. And the remedy for this kind of heinous crime against humanity is reparations. Over to you.
My sister from St. Martin, I have no idea where, I did not know that there's a country called St. Martin. I'm telling you, I'm learning every day. Oh, they're all from, okay. Okay. I tend to answer that question in this way. So, in my opinion, that is deliberate. It's deliberate from our own nation states, our leadership, our political leaders, to not join the dots. It's very, very deliberate. I think Africa is in a very dangerous space at the moment, where we are seeing new dynasties being created. They will not even talk about the Mwanamatapa Empire, let alone actually put in money so that we have got a deep understanding of what it actually meant. The Great Zimbabwe Empire. You will not discover that actually in any classroom. It's not there. You only get surprised when you actually go to the actual site to say, oh, we did that? Was it us? You know? Because a lot of, I think when Africa got independent, a lot of our leaders decided that the conversations, the history, must start with them. So a lot of it just starts with Robert Mugabe did this. The current guy is actually busy writing out Robert Mugabe as we speak in the history books. So that's how crazy it is. It even becomes much more dangerous for some of us because so I make documentaries, I make feature films, I'm into theater and so forth. And I can safely tell you this, that in Zimbabwe, we actually have got 2 sites that were used as jetties for slavery. We know the remnants are there. When you actually go into the border with Mozambique, on the other side, where you actually have got an outlet into the Indian Ocean. We know it, we've documented about it, we've spoken about it. But when you now go into the politics and say, shall we have part of this history being recorded and being recognized? Oh, they'll tell you, no, we are too busy. So everyone is just busy. We are busy doing nothing. So, but anyway, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to add another dimension to what David and I'm adding dimensions today to what David and Ende said. Yes, David and David. One of the reasons is because of something that is very similar in the Caribbean. And that is because we like to hide our past because we think that we were complicit in it. So in Africa, the myth has been spread that Africans were responsible for enslavement of Africans without thinking about the dimension that David spoke to, which is a totally different type of enslavement. In the Caribbean, you could be bought, sold, born as an enslaved person. Usually in Africa, it was after a war or some kind of disagreement, etc. You could be inherited. And that law that David spoke to also spoke to the fact that now a lot of these planters had the liberty to rape. And so if you look at some of the reports that come out with regard to how much compensation, how much reparations, especially with regard to women, and if you consider that women were raped from the time they were 10, if you can consider a 10-year-old woman. And this was done for close to 400 years. The calculation in some of the texts is that there were more than 50 million rapes of women in the Caribbean and in the United States over that period of time. I remember speaking to Sir Hilary on one occasion, and he was saying that when you look at the statistics, the first 2 children of enslaved women were always mulatto. So the planters thought they had a right to the bodies of these young women. So their first 2 children, after that, they become African, fully African. But the first 2 children were always mulatto. And so all of these laws, we have to look at them closely. And we also have to call for their decolonization, even at the level of the ICJ. So I'd like to go to that question with regard to the international community that was asked. And the point was made about the United Nations. At the United Nations, we have a number of anti-racism mechanisms. I sit on the United Nations Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. Vereen Shepherd, from Jamaica, one of our preeminent historians, sits on the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Barbara sits on the Working Group for People yes, Barbara Reynolds sits on the Working Group for People of African Descent. So throughout all of the UN systems, Caribbean people are located. Gaynell Curry also sits on the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. And we have called for these things. But when you are going to face an ICJ that is also colonial, You have a challenge. So we also have to decolonize the United Nations. You yourself would know as a woman of African descent that you do not get the justice that you deserve within the United Nations. The promotions go to other people. Yet when people look at the diversity within the United Nations and call for the removal, the first thing they will do is to look for people with melanated skins to remove, and not other people, because they think we do not deserve, we still do not deserve a seat 80 years after the United Nations was formed. And so we, and I'm saying we because we Caribbean people, we don't realize how powerful we are. And the influence that we have had in putting on the agenda the humanity of people of African descent and Africans. We are the ones who put it on the agenda. And so we are the ones who are supposed to continue to fight. It's not a fight for the weary. We understand that. But we will continue with the struggle, and we invite all of you to come on board. Join the reparations movement. All of us have national reparations committees. All of us that form the CARICOM Reparations Committee. Come on board. Let us hear your voices. All of us could do with the support as we move along. Thank you.
It is incumbent upon me as I think it is the last response from the panel before we turn over to our moderator, to take us into the future. And my question to center myself on the future in the last few months has been, who is the Caribbean citizen in 2030? Who is the Caribbean citizen in 2040? Many of our countries have development plans, Vision 2030 in Jamaica, for example. We have put on paper some of the ways in which we want to take our development forward. I want to give two reminders to respond to some of the things that have been said. One is that a vision of our development cannot, in the ways that we've written them, cannot be devoid of a reparatory justice agenda. These visions, these documents need to be rewritten. And it must be an urgent matter to reframe our development plans and our visions for our countries in terms that center reparation. I said before, reparation is our only job right now. And my second reminder, and this comes from David, our brother from Zimbabwe, who pointed us in a direction, and there are panelists who have mentioned in different ways this question, and I also began with an invocation to our ancestors. The mission of reparation, part of why we are still in the places that we exist, is that black people are the only ones forgetting their ancestors. You walk into a Chinese shop, an Indian shop, our brothers and sisters from other continents, of other ethnicities, are not leaving their ancestors behind. That's right. There are reasons why we are leaving our ancestors behind, and we understand that that's part of the trauma, that's part of the decolonization work that we must do. It is incumbent upon each of us to bring our ancestors with us, wherever into the spaces that we walk. We must remember them. We must call their names. We must also teach ourselves about our indigenous spiritual practices. We must teach ourselves about spiritual Baptist, about Orisha. We must teach ourselves how to reconnect with our ancestors. We may not be able to speak traditional languages of Africa, but guess what? Many of us will hear from our ancestors once we begin to call their names and to honor them. It happened for me at a personal level when my own father passed away. That's how it happens for many of us. That something happens, whether it's a dream, whether it's a calling, whether it's a vision, whatever it is we might want to call it. We must not ever alienate our ancestors.
Thank you, and just I endorse all of what my fellow panelists have said, and those last words from Professor Sonia Stanley now. But I also wanted to leave us with a feeling of encouragement and hope, and to say how happy I am to have had the participation of our brother Dave from Zimbabwe, and how much we identify and with the whole restitution of cultural property, and even highlighting, for example, an experience that I had in Kenya with the Pokomo royal community and the sacred Ngaji drum, an 8-foot imposing drum, 2 feet in diameter, which has been in one of the British museums for 110 years. And how the king of that community, King Mungazi Makarani VII, when he had the opportunity recently to see the Ngaji, he wept. And he is the keeper of the Ngaji that was stolen by the colonizers and taken to Britain 110 years ago. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing your play tonight and really encouraging everybody to be there. But finally, just to say that when we started on this journey, and this is not at all not taking into account the incredible work of Rastafari and our artists and our Pan-Africanists who have kept the memory alive and that fire within us in singing about the experiences under enslavement. And 12 years ago, though, when our governments now decided to join hands with civil society to embark on this important mission, everybody thought, we're crazy. This is not going anywhere. That happened long ago. They're not going to take you seriously. And look at where we have come. You have to change hearts and minds before you can realize progress. And so now we're seeing families apologizing, the Church of England, all of the private sector organizations apologizing. We have incredible media attention to everything. Reparations, it is a major item in the news media. And so we are on a journey. We invite you all to join us. We need that advocacy at home, in the schools. This is what Sonia was saying about taking it in the streets. It is each of us becoming educated on the issues and sharing it right at our dining table. My daughter there says to me, Mom, why do so many of our conversations end with talking about enslavement? We have to continue to talk about it and ensure that the next generation is knowledgeable. There's a group of 5 young advocates right now in the Grand Market who are youth advocates for reparations. And they are there engaging the public and sharing their knowledge. This is what we need to do in a practical way, and we have come a long way. We have seen the progress, and it is through all of us coming together on this agenda that we are going to realize the justice that we deserve for our ancestors and for us who continue to live with the legacies of indigenous genocide and slavery. And so, thank you. I'll stop there.
Please give a resounding, warm round of applause to our panelists. And keep me in prayer for being able to try to moderate and keep it within time, because you can't stop this type of energy, and the ancestors have brought forth a coolness in the space. And I just wanted to close with Marcus Garvey argued for reparations and reparatory justice as a way to return wealth and resources stolen through enslavement, trafficking, colonization to the entire African diaspora. And his standard of excellence in the 20th century, we have all of the resources we need and require to do the exact same thing on a higher level, even exponentially greater, as we move beyond into the 21st century. So I want to thank you all again. And for the purposes of the video here, I have to remember that part, we want to give our thanks to the Republic of Barbados, to the organizers of CARIFEST 15 here in Barbados, definitely to Dr. Marielle for just having the insight to help us to organize and facilitate these types of things, and a very warm, this is for those of us that may not be from Barbados but are still looking for our honorary birth certificate, give a resounding round of applause to Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley for having the insight, the vision, and the boldness and the fierceness to lead in this trajectory. And for those that did not get my name in the beginning because she did not say it, I am Dr. Chinzira Davis Kahina, affectionately known as Dr. Chen. So I sit today in this space as a representative of the Caribbean Pan-African Network that sits within and has representation in the CARICOM Reparations Commission, in addition to being the second Assistant President General of the still in existence UNIA ACL-RC 2020. And with that, we say, Hotep, greetings, and may all of our ancestors be praised.
Can kind of be like seeds, especially sometimes when it's not a good thought, right? If that thought is planted in our hearts and that thought grows, what will happen? Wow. This is a not so good thought planted in my heart. Let's think about this. When we plant tomato seeds, what thing will come out of the tomato seed? Tomatoes, right? When it grows up,